Good
Ça,
afternoon
nous
to
vous
all of
remercions
you.
d'être
Thank you so
présents avec nous
much.
aujourd'hui pour ce webinaire qui, j'espère, va beaucoup vous intéresser, qui est
I
vraiment
hope you will find very
actuel
interesting.
aussi, sur
It's a
les services
very
de
timely
Rebâtir.
issue. We'll be talking about the
Donc, nous
services
avons
of
trois
Rebâtir, this
présentatrices aujourd'hui,
group. We
puis
have
le
three
sujet
presenters
va
today,
traiter en fait des
and
services
we will be
Rebâtir,
dealing with
quelle
the
est son
services given by
approche de logement
Rebâtir
innovante avec les
and
résultats
its
concrets.
innovative approach and
Donc, je vais vous
concrete results.
présenter
So
les trois
I'd like to
présentatrices aujourd'hui.
introduce
Donc,
to you the three
Madame
speakers
Marie-Claude
today,
Richer, qui est un conseiller de
Marie-Claude
défense ayant un
Richer,
profond engagement vers la
who
justice.
has been
Après
involved
16
in
ans
the
de pratique
justice
privée,
system for
elle a rejoint l'aide
36
juridique en
years.
2006, se
After
distinguant en droit de la
private
famille, en
practice,
représentation
she
d'enfants
moved
et en santé mentale.
into
Elle a dirigé
uh,
plusieurs bureaux
public
juridiques avec
practice. She
bienveillance et
has
leadership. Son
directed a number
implication
of
dans le barreau est marquée par de nombreux mandats
offices,
et distinctions,
and she
dont le
has
mérite et
received many
votre longueuil.
awards. She
Depuis
has, in
2021,
fact,
elle est
been
directrice de
recognized by the
Rebâtir, où elle continue de défendre les
Longueuil
plus
Bar
vulnérables avec
Association.
passion et rigueur.
She has
Nous
been
avons
director of
également Madame
Rebâtir and,
Aello, qui a débuté sa
for
carrière en
many years.
2011 en droit criminel dans la
Miss
région métropolitaine
Aelo
avant
works
de
in
rejoindre
criminal
cette aide
law
juridique de
and is
Joliette
now
en
with
2018.
Joliet Legal Aid
Depuis
as of
2021, elle aide
2018. Since
Rebâtir, où elle
2021, she's
soutient les
been working
personnes
with
victimes et avec
Rebâtir,
humanité en matière de
where
droit
she
criminel,
supports victims
de logement et d'identité.
humanely
Elle a siégé au
in
conseil
criminal issues
d'administration du
and housing
Cercle du
issues.
soutien et de
She's a
responsabilité du
member of the
Québec,
board of the
démontrant
Cercle
son
du
engagement vers
Soutien,
la
and
prévention
she
des violences
shows her
sexuelles.
commitment to
Madame Aello
preventing
a suivi plus de
sexual
160 heures
assault.
de formation violences conjugales et
She has
sexuelles et
given
partage ses
more than
connaissances en formant
160
divers
hours of
intervenants du
training,
milieu
and
social
she
et
trains
judiciaire.
people in the legal
Madame
and
Joëlle
social work
Pilon est
sector.
avocate à l'aide
Madame
juridique depuis
Joëlle
11 ans,
Pilon
spécialisée en droit administratif,
is
civil et du
a
logement.
specialist
Elle
in
s'implique activement
administrative
auprès des
law.
victimes
She's
de
been
violences conjugales et
actively
sexuelles au
involved
sein de
in
Rebâtir et les
victims of
informe et
sexual and
accompagne dans
family
leur
assault at
démarche judiciaire.
Rebâtir, and
Elle
she helps them
contribue
and
à
informs
l'élaboration
them
de
to help them through
solutions
the
pour
legal
un maintien
system. She
sécuritaire dans les
works
lieux.
on
Son
teaching them about the
expertise
legal
l'a
system and
menée à
keeping them
offrir des
safe.
formations en
Her
outils
expertise has
pratiques
led
avec des
her
partenaires comme
to
Éduc
work
et Juripa.
with Éduc
Conférencière au colloque
Edouard
sur la
and
violence
Jolipa.
conjugale en
She,
2023, elle défend
in
une approche
2000,
multidisciplinaire.
she
Elle
defends
siège
a
également au CA, une
multidisciplinary
maison
approach,
d'hébergement.
and she's also on the board of directors of a
Alors,
women's
je vous
shelter.
remercie,
So,
c'est ça, d'être présente
thank you for
à
being
ce
here
webinaire qu'on va donc
with us.
débuter
And we
maintenant.
will now start.
Donc, ce webinaire est organisé
This
dans le cadre du
webinar has been
projet
organized as part of a
A2A, A2A,
A2A
qui est
project,
actuellement organisé par le
and
REV.
it's
REV.
organized by the REV
Euh,
Association.
et ce que je vais vous faire, donc je vais vous proposer
So
alors à toutes les personnes présentes,
I'd like all of you
selon le PowerPoint que vous allez choisir, donc en français ou en
to
anglais,
choose
vous
your
avez en haut un
PowerPoint in
petit
English or in
écran de
French.
diapositive en
At the
française. Donc
top of
si
the
vous cliquez
screen, you
là-dessus,
can
vous allez avoir la
click
version
on
française
your
du PowerPoint.
choice. You'll see the
Si vous
French
cliquez sur
version or the
Become
English.
English
If you
Slide,
click on
vous
English
allez
slide,
avoir
you
l'écran du
will
PowerPoint
get
en
the
anglais.
PowerPoint in
Et
English.
pour avoir
And
l'interprétation
to have
simultanée, donc vous pouvez aller
simultaneous
en bas sur votre
interpretation,
écran
go to the bottom of
et
the
cliquer
screen
sur l'icône
and
du
click
globe.
on the
Et là, vous pourrez
globe
choisir la langue qui
icon,
sera
and
la
you can
mieux pour vous,
choose
donc en
the
anglais ou
language
en
of your
français.
choice, English or French.
Nous aurons une petite période de
We will
questions-réponses à
have
la
a
toute
little
fin. Donc, on va
Q&A at the
laisser les
end,
présentatrices vraiment
and
présenter le sujet. Puis à la
but
toute
first
fin,
of
on
all,
va
we'll
vous
let our
revenir
speakers
avec
present
les
the topic, and at the
questions-réponses.
very end,
Vous pouvez les
we'll
envoyer
do this
dans la
Q&A.
partie questions et réponses que vous
And you
voyez
can send your
également en bas
questions
de votre
to
écran.
the
Donc, je vous remercie
via the Q&A
et
box.
bienvenue.
So
Et je
thank
laisse
you
la
and
parole
welcome.
à
And now I'm
Marie-Claude.
going to
Merci.
give the floor to Marie-Claude.
Alors, d'abord, merci
First
pour
of all,
l'opportunité qui
thank
nous
you
est
for
offerte
giving
de
us
vous
this
présenter
wonderful
les services
opportunity
Rebâtir.
to talk to you about the services
Comme
Rebâtir
vient de mentionner, je suis
offers.
accompagnée aujourd'hui
As
de Maître Joyelle
I
Pilon et
have
Maître
with me
Aello, qui sont de Rebâtir
Ms.
depuis le début.
Joëlle Pilon and Ms. Aiello,
Alors,
who've
en
been
quelques
there
mots,
since
qu'est-ce
the
que ce
beginning
sont
as
les lieux
lawyers.
Rebâtir? Vous
So,
n'êtes pas sans
what is the
savoir qu'à
social
partir de
context?
2017, le Québec,
As you
comme
know, since
d'autres régions
2017,
du
Quebec,
Québec et du
like
Canada ou d'autres
other
pays,
regions Canada
ont
and
été
in
touchés
Canada
par
and
des
other
mouvements de
countries,
dénonciation
have been
des
strongly
violences
affected by
sexuelles et des
social
violences
movements
conjugales.
denouncing sexual
Ces
and
mouvements
domestic violence.
sociaux-là
The social movement sought to denounce the shortcomings and the lack of support for victims, the complexity of slowness of legal proceedings, and the feeling of injustice and underreporting, which that people were very disappointed in the system. In Quebec, we have groups and public figures that have helped to raise public awareness and alert elected officials to the need to reform the social justice system. And that is why the Expert Committee on Support for Victims of Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence was created in March 2019. Their mandate was to evaluate existing measures and to propose concrete solutions to improve support to victims. There was a real desire for judicial reform in Quebec. We wanted to restore victims' confidence or trust in the judicial system, and we wanted to adapt the justice system to help victims and ensure a better understanding of the various options available to them both within and outside the justice system. And that's when the Rebâtir report was created. It was written by Julie Desrosiers and a justice of the Supreme Court of Quebec. The report proposed 190 recommendations, including the creation of a specialized court for sexual and domestic violence in Quebec, and also the creation of the Rebâtir line. To date, 169 recommendations have been fully or partially implemented by the Quebec government. Currently, it's 169 recommendations. We are the result of recommendation number 25 of this report, which grants all victims of sexual assault or domestic violence the right to 4 hours of free legal advice in all areas of law, regardless of their income. So on the 27th of September, 2021, Rebâtir was born, and this law came into effect in 2021 also. So what is Rebâtir? In your PowerPoint, you can look at an article from La Presse written by Ms. El Khoury, who mentioned that Julie, as a result of these reforms, the Rebâtir line was created, and and it really meets the needs of victims. So Rebâtir was born on the 27th of September, and what is it exactly? It's a legal advice service. It's not just legal information. The legal advice is given exclusively to people who are victims of sexual assault and domestic violence, including Indigenous people. It's offered to Quebecers throughout Quebec, real-time or by appointment, and it's 100% virtual service. So victims can get in touch with us from Monday to Friday from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. A lawyer will answer the phone, or they can set an appointment with a lawyer if they want legal assistance, and an appointment will be given to the victim. And if they need an interpreter or another type of person to offer assistance, they'll be offered too. It's offered in all areas: family law, criminal law, civil law, immigration, IVAC, which is a compensation fund, youth, and accommodations. We'll come back to this again during the presentation, but all the lawyers at Rebâtir have specialties, and as you can see, they offer a great deal of information that victims need. In particular, I'm thinking of family law and people who are experts in parental authority, loss of parental authority, divorce, protection orders, and we have even worked on international files. The mission of Rebâtir and its objectives are to enable victims to demystify the justice system and its workings, making the possibility of reporting a crime or taking legal action against an abuser less intimidating. It enables victims to understand the avenues available to them and make an informed decision. And this is the cornerstone of the work that we do at Rebâtir. It's to inform and to advise the victim so that she can take power over her life and make decisions that meet her needs. Of course, we support victims throughout the legal process by being available and attentive to their concerns and needs, and we give these victims back their power to make their own decisions and promote their empowerment. We refer victims to specialized organizations and help to build a support network around the victim. We also contribute to the protection of victims by deploying a safety net around the person. Our mandate is different, and we decided to take a humane approach. We have specialized expertise. Usually, most lawyers at Rebâtir have over 200 hours of training in soft skills, communication skills, and know-how. We have over 50 hours of training, and we give presentations. We've given over 250 presentations like the presentation today. First of all, our first and foremost goal is to ensure the victim's safety. Lise will be talking about it. We've developed an approach where we ensure that the victim is safe before giving them legal advice. We also use an interpreter bank if we want the interpreter to understand, or rather the victim to understand the services. They have to be understood. And often the work of an interpreter is indispensable. We also have a 360-degree approach. Often, victims have very specific questions to ask us. They don't realize that domestic violence also affects other parts of their lives, or they don't know the other services that are available to them. The lawyers at Rebâtir will work together to offer these other services. Often, a victim calls us and has a specific family law concern, but she might also speak to Elise and talk to her about compensation for victims of crime, and other lawyers who will explain how it will work if she makes a complaint to the police. At Rebâtir, we also have an innovative services called co-consultations. A victim gets in contact with us, but will also have 2 or 3 lawyers who will help her to develop the best strategy possible. For instance, is a custody request a priority, or a request that Child Protective Services start work, or should she make a complaint to the police? The lawyers speak with the victim, understand her concerns, and then determine what is best to do. And we don't work in silos, and that's why our partners are so important. We do a lot of mutual referrals, and we work with a number of partners. For us, it's very important to offer a full service, a one-stop shop service to our our victims. We don't go before the courts, though. So if a victim needs to go before the courts to make a civil complaint or a family law complaint, we send them to their regional legal aid office, which will look at whether they're eligible for legal aid. But if there's an emergency situations, coverage is always available, and they will have full representation in court for victims eligible for legal aid. If they're not eligible, then Rebâtir will work with them to find a lawyer who will be able to represent them before the courts. Earlier on, I mentioned that we offer more than 200, we have more than 200 hours of specialized training that you can see that both our lawyers and our support staff have had this training. The secretaries, the first people who are in contact with the victims also get this training, and they need it to better support those who call them. We also have taken training on the realities of Indigenous peoples, and we have created a bank of interpreters and developed partnerships to be able to properly support people, anyone, including Indigenous peoples. We also offer a number of training courses to our partners in the community. There's training on cyber violence, human trafficking training, protective orders, and multiple reporting and training, which is very popular, that Catherine and Elise give, is how to ensure the safety of the victim of domestic violence. We had the privilege of offering it to the Montreal Division justices and those in the criminal and penal prosecutions branch. We've and specialized courts. When I was talking about partnerships that we've developed, here are some examples. The Sûreté du Québec, the Quebec police, we stay in regular contact with them, and every year, this year it will be the 26th of November, we also participate in a special day where Quebec police, not just the Sûreté, but also municipal police services and shelters and other interveners meet together. And they go out and meet with the citizens of Quebec to make our services known. As we mentioned earlier on, we developed mutual referrals with pediatric service and other services. We also work on domestic violence with the Standing Committee on the Status of Women in Canada, and we have a number of partnerships that we've developed over the last 4 years. We also have a project that is really important to us. It's the pre-reporting service. As you know, in Quebec, the main role of criminal lawyers represent the perpetrators, but we're doing the opposite. We work with criminal lawyers who represent the victims. But how do we do this? By holding pre-denunciation or pre-reporting meetings. Catherine will talk a bit more about this later. We have 2 pilot projects that have been established, including one with La Traversée, which is a sexual violence service where victims can contact the lawyers at Rebâtir to be able to meet them before they make their complaint. We also have 2 partnerships with Anna Laberge Hospital and the Suroît Regional Hospital Center, where victims of sexual abuse who are medically examined, are automatically referred to the lawyers at Rebâtir. We have also worked with the Ministry of Justice and the Specialized Court for Sexual Violence and Domestic Violence, and there is a framework that will be established in order to help people with these pre-denunciation or pre-reporting meetings. We try to break down silos, and there are many. There are four lawyers who sit on the boards of directors of shelters, and we are also involved in the National Consultation Table on Police Intervention in Domestic Violence, Ministry of Public Security. We also work with the Subcommittee on the Declaration of the Victim of Domestic Violence, Ministry of Public Security, and we also work on the Advisory Committee on the Working Committee on Domestic Violence at the Secretariat for the Status of Women. We offer legal advice, but we want to do more too at Rebâtir, and that's why we've also developed an information note at the very beginning, and we did that at the beginning of Rebâtir because we realized that the release condition forms that were used did not satisfy us and would not protect victims. Recently, we learned that the suggestions made to public security have been instituted by most police services in Quebec. We also developed an information note that was sent to our partners so that in as much as possible, we can maintain victims in their communities after the police has intervened. Quite often, when the police intervenes, the victim was taken out of her home and sent to a shelter or sent to people who could take care of her. And the result of this was that when the victim wanted to go back to her apartment, it was difficult for her, or it was impossible because the gentleman was the perpetrator, the gentleman was still living there. I'm talking about men and women because our main clientele is made up of women. And we felt, therefore, that it was important to explain to our partners that in certain situations, it would be better to enable the person to stay in her own home and offer her protection, or to take her out of the home, but then bring her back into the home with a safety net. But it was important that in as much as possible, she be able to stay in her home. Sometimes there's no choice. You have to take the victim out if she's in danger. But in other situations, this can be done. She can be left in her home. And we have worked with a number of partners. As you know, with all the housing problems that we have both in Quebec and elsewhere, the situation is such that when a person was taken out of her home, the only choice that she had was to go back to living with her abuser, economically speaking. And that's why we worked so hard to develop these partnerships and these procedures in order to work with public safety and the ministries. We also participated in a panel with the Canadian Ministry of Justice because we want coercive control to be in the criminal code. We also develop training to ensure the security of victims, and we set up a committee to recover furniture and personal effects. There was someone in Quebec who was killed when she went home to recover her personal property. So we want to work with our partners so that victims who want to go back home to get their property back are properly supported and protected. It's also important for us to raise awareness amongst in the population. And so Rebâtir gives interviews to newspapers and it appears on TV. For us, it's important to explain that we're all responsible for the safety of victims when they are victims of domestic violence. Now let's talk statistics. Right now, right here, you see the age category of people who contact Rebâtir. There are a number of people, unfortunately, between 35 and 44 who contact us. Those who, and those and but we have people who contact us who are from 18 to 24. we have given 89,000 legal consultations, mostly in family and mental health and real estate, but we also work on immigration, the IVAC, mental health, and over 21,000 victims contacted us. And over 6,000 files have been transferred to legal aid. 3,000 of these files were urgently transferred to legal aid. Our clientele is made up of a majority of people who are victims of domestic violence, 83%. 17% are victims of sexual violence, which is not related to domestic violence. But we mustn't forget that 90, we mustn't forget are 83% of victims, and it's also, and we can't forget that these victims of domestic violence are also victims of sexual violence. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to note that 93 requests come from women and 7% from men. Now, Madame Richer is now going to speak, or Madame Aelou, rather. So we use the prism of coercive control. We're aware of all the strategies that perpetrators use to control, isolate, and deprive victims from their rights and freedoms. When we offer consultations, you have to remember the terrible effects that this can have on the victim and on their safety. There is no definition of coercive control in the law. However, the Divorce Act mentions it. In Article 2, it says that family violence is denoted by its cumulative nature, by coercive and controlling behavior, or that causes other family members to fear for their safety. There's also a mention of coercive control in Article 16, which deals with the interests of the child. And the courts have to take this into account too. There are various definitions made by the courts, and we're not going to go over them all, but it's also important to remember that the Department of Justice has determined that coercive control is a particularly dangerous form of control for children. They also mention that violence, physical violence, is more likely to develop, and perpetrators can't distinguish between the roles of their spouses and parents, and they're more likely to mistreat their children after separation or divorce. Although coercive control has not been criminalized, the Director of Criminal and Penal Prosecutions has the definition in their own documents, and they have to take into account the concept of coercive control when thinking about releasing the perpetrator. It's essential that the police take this into account too, and that's why we've developed and given a number of training courses to police services. There are a number of partners from various areas who have worked together in order to create a new form that is filled out by the victim, which will enable the victim and the patroller to ask certain specific questions in order to better understand whether there is coercive control at play. This new form will be used throughout Quebec in the upcoming months. Thank you, Catherine. Now, Marie-Claude, earlier on you were saying that we've developed an approach towards the safety of victims that is at the heart of what we do. And Catherine just talked about working through the prism of coercive control to analyze violence. Now I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about why we've developed this approach. Of course, it's based on statistics that you can see here on the screen and that deal with feminicide, filicide, and familicide. We also built our approach on data and what experts have said about family violence and homicides. I'm going to go quickly because I'm sure many of you know these issues already. 75% of domestic homicides in Canada occurred when separation was imminent. 49% of homicides occur within 2 months of separation, 32% within 2 to 12 months, and 19% occur more than a year later. This is violence after the separation. The risk of violence does not end with the separation. The most dangerous moment is when the breakup is perceived by the spouse as irreversible, and lawyers, we often intervene during the divorce proceedings because of this. 45% were killed in the home they shared with the accused. We look at cohabitation after separation and the whole issue of nesting, which we're not necessarily in favor where there is domestic violence. 16% of filicides and femilicides occur in the context of separation or disputes over child custody. Once again, we as lawyers become involved in such disputes. And of course, we also use what came out of the recommendations made by the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee. A number of recommendations came out of the analysis of dozens of femicides, and a number of these recommendations affect the Quebec Bar Association, the Ministry of Justice, the DCPP, and the Judicial Council. I'm going to read them to you because they're very relevant, and our approach is based in part on these recommendations. First, the importance of verifying the history of violence contained in the court records, improving the training of lawyers and judges, emphasizing the role they can play in detecting and preventing violence, developing a common understanding of the issue of violence, particularly when it does not involve recent physical assault or occurs in a post-separation context, and better understanding coercive control to enable a more comprehensive assessment of violent situations, consulting SOS violence conjugale during the increase in civil proceedings in cases of suspected domestic violence to ensure the protection of potential victims. There's something missing on the screen, and directing, it's on the English screen, directing both victims and perpetrators to organizations specializing in domestic violence. We've also read a number of coroner's reports. Some underscore the presence of criminal proceedings or family court proceedings that are either that are tabled. These are part of the circumstances of the death, or they have been identified as being triggering factors. There's also legislative framework. We'll go back to the definition of family violence. What you see are the risk factors that are used in the tools we use in Quebec that are mentioned in the tools. For us, these risk factors can be used before the courts and can be taken into account when judges are making decisions regarding the children, for instance, in cases of domestic violence. This is very interesting. It's new in family law, the idea of risk factors. There are a number of professionals working with these factors for many years, in particular doctors, but it's relatively new for doctors. There's been recent case law, though, that uses the conclusions of the 3 reports that I mentioned earlier on from the domestic violence death review. They used as a guide. The court says, for instance, when there's an emergency and when there's no real ability to see if the situation will degenerate, these are at least a guide for the relevant elements that need to be identified. This is new, but it is now coming into case law, and we're going to have to watch what happens in the law. Now, why do lawyers have a role to play? There's a 2021 study from the Institute of Statistics of Quebec. They did an investigation of domestic violence in Quebec. And what's important to see on this slide is that female victims who have used services when separating, and who have been in a violent situation, they've gone to psychologists, social workers, also sometimes use legal services. Often victims come to us, and that is why we have to the law has to pay attention to what we do to make these victims safer. Now, there are a number of different stakeholders who have to become involved in creating this safety net. We have to remain in contact with all these stakeholders, and each stakeholder with their specific knowledge helps to create the safety net. Because safety should not just happen by accident. Now, this is important because of what we just said, but it's also beneficial and strategically important. Why is it beneficial? If you look at the Maslow triangle on the right, safety is a basic need that comes right after physiological needs like eating and drinking. Safety or security is seen in a broad sense, as we do physical safety, children, employment, health, property. We want to ensure the victim's security so the victim can understand the advice we give and to move through the legal system. So it's very beneficial. And it's also strategic because it enables us to adjust our requests to the courts based on the actual risks in the file and the victim's actual situation so that the courts can stop the violence. Once again, the law says under Section 16 regarding the interests of the child, this is in the Divorce Act, that the court shall, in paragraph 3, in determining the best interests of the child, the court shall consider any factor related to the child's circumstances, including the presence of family violence and its effect on the child. This is very important to be done. This leads us to look at the lawyer's role, the lawyer who represents a domestic violence victim. They have to understand knowledge They have to have know-how, soft skills, technical skills. They have to be able to detect violence and identify risks and needs, contribute to the deployment of a physical and psychological safety net, and of course, reassess and refer. We send victims to other interveners so that we can continue to protect victims and create non-events and avoid the worst. This has led to the creation of a number of rapid reaction cells. We've participated in many cases, and in our opinion, we are contributing to protecting high-risk people. We're part of a small team, and we're part of a risk of homicide support team. How do we do this as lawyers? How do we contribute to the safety net? This is a very busy slide because we have a lot of tools. So depending on the victim situation, we determine what kinds of remedies are most appropriate. Catherine is going to talk to you about criminal law. We'll talk about IVAC, which is the compensation fund, and family and civil law too. Now, when you go before the courts to get custody, this often increases the safety of the victim because for the perpetrator, this may mean it is the end of the relationship. And that's why it's important to strengthen the safety net. Criminal law is one of the tools that we can use. In Rebâtir, if the victim consents, we give priority to criminal law because this is probably the best tool, the fastest tool that we can use. By reporting the situation to the police, the person can be arrested and may have to respect certain conditions. We're aware that criminal law conditions will not guarantee safety. However, it is a tool that can contribute to increasing the safety of the victim if it is used properly. Our objective is to add links to the safety net and make sure that it protects the person. So we do a collection we collect the facts of the case, we look at where the red flags are, and we also try to see what kind of criminal offenses can be brought up. If there are criminal offenses, we have to explain to the victim her right to complain, make a complaint to the police, even if the events took place a long time ago. No matter what area we work in, we have to understand the various definitions of domestic violence offenses. First of all, to help the victim to understand what she has experienced and inform her of her options so that the police will be able to intervene. And it's also important to use the right terms and the right behavior to help and to help the perpetrator to do the right thing and ensure that the victim understands that they will do so. And there has to be consistency between the various areas in the cases of domestic violence. As you know, domestic violence is not just a criminal offense. It is a context in which a criminal offense takes place. So you have to take into account the different types of violence that can take place and are experienced in order to understand what is a criminal offense and what is not. Too often victims tell us that they were not able to get police protection from the criminal justice system. And when we look at the situation, we often see that they didn't highlight the events that would have been seen as a criminal offense, being denigrated, harassed many years, causes often more harm than being hit in the face. So sometimes when they speak to the police, they talk about what was the violence that had the greatest impact on them, but these are not necessarily criminal offenses. When we begin to work in with a file, it's important to understand, but to also to explain to the victim what will enable the criminal justice system to intervene. Here you see on the screen an image that I use. There's the big circle of domestic violence within, and you can see various examples. But within this big circle, there's a smaller circle. And we call it the little circle of criminal offenses. And there are only some of these violent behaviors that are in the big circle that can be brought into the little circle of criminal offenses. And if it's in the little circle, then the police can act. But they have to be in the small circle. It doesn't mean that what's in the big circle is unimportant or not relevant. In particular, in terms of coercive control. But what enables the police to act are the events that take place within the little circle. We have criminal lawyers at Rebâtir, and their role is to guide victims throughout the legal process. The criminal lawyers can help victims before they make their complaint to the police. And this is ideal because it enables us to create the best file possible. They can also help victims during the criminal in the justice system, although our lawyers have no decision-making power. But victims have to understand the various stages so they don't lose trust in the system. If someone loses trust in the system, they're less inclined to go and testify before the courts. And without any witnesses, the system will not be able to protect the person properly. So the second tool that we wanted to show you is which enables us to build this safety net is the IVAC, which is the Fund to Compensate Victims of Criminal Acts. Someone who is a victim can fill out a form and apply to the fund, and this will contribute to helping the victim to get back on their feet. You don't have to make a complaint to the police, but you need to be able to refer to an offense in the small circle. This is an organization which reimburses or offers financial service aid to the victim to help them get back on their feet. As I explained, it works via a form to see whether the person is eligible. There are two parts that are important: the criminal offenses and the consequences of these offenses. A few examples of possible financial assistance: you can get income replacement up to 90% of net income if the person is no longer able to work, reimbursement of moving expenses up to $8,000, reimbursement of 2 months rent due if the lease is terminated due to domestic violence, installation of an alarm system, cameras, bars, changing the locks, all self-defense courses, and reimbursement of therapy fees, psychologists, psychotherapists, social works, etc. All of this, of course, is linked to the violence, the reimbursement of travel costs. But this gives you an idea of what's available. We also use the ISA protocol. This is neither a law or a regulation. It's an agreement between partners in 5 regions for the time being in Quebec. Drummondville is going to be added soon. And the ISA enables the installation of an alarm system, contrary to EVAC, which reimburses in the installation costs. The ISA protocol pays for 12 months of installments. And at the police station, there is a special alarm. You must file a complaint with the police, and you must no longer live with the spouse. So this is another measure that we can use to act and ensure that the safety net, in terms of housing law, there are a number of different measures depending on the victim. If the victim wishes to leave the residence, there's something that you need to understand and that will help with their safety. The Domestic Violence Death Review Committee recommended in its third report that the Ministry of Justice promote a measure enabling anyone who is the victim of domestic violence or sexual assault or violence towards a child in the dwelling to be able to cancel their lease for safety reasons. So based on a written form that's sent to a public officer, for instance, the Director of Criminal and Penal Prosecutions, the victim can have their lease canceled. And this is a great measure because it doesn't require a hearing before the courts. The person doesn't have to be a victim of a criminal act. In other words, behavior in the large circle, behaviors that are in the large circle are enough to be able to use these measures. If the victim does not want to leave their home and wants to stay in their home, in that case, they can go to the housing court and ask that the court evicts the perpetrator of violence. And the reason, the grounds would be disturbance of peaceful enjoyment of housing. And that has caused serious harm to the victim. We have a lot of challenges at Rebâtir, and our main challenge right now is a lack of staff. There are only 14 lawyers to cover all the areas of law related to sexual assault and domestic violence, which limits our ability to respond in real time to victims, although we usually answer their calls on the same day. Often the calls come in on Monday, or often people call more when there has been a case of feminicide that they hear about. But we have little time to develop training or contribute to the advancement of research. If we could work more on this, we could do a lot more. Another one of our challenges, and not everybody knows this, but for a year we got funding so that 2 of our lawyers could represent people before the courts, in particular before Superior Court in family law. This team represented 200 people. That's huge for a one-year period. These were complicated files that required interpreters in some cases, and it required lawyers who understood what domestic violence is in order to move case law forward. Another challenge that the victims have told us about is that the fact that there are few lawyers in private practice who accept legal aid mandates to represent victims of domestic and sexual violence. We think it's because these are complicated files. There's a lot, there's a heavy workload, but things are evolving things are evolving very fast in Quebec. All the issues that we just talked about in a situation where there's insufficient resources and specialized support, all of this can compromise rather, the safety and stability of victims and decrease their access to the justice system. There are some victims who unfortunately have to represent themselves and confront the perpetrator and respond to allegations of parental alienation, whereas they're just trying to protect their child, or they sometimes have to protect themselves against charges against them. And they have to deal with these severe problems related to separations. In order to counter these challenges, our partners have said we need a multidisciplinary team across the province. We need multidisciplinary expertise for lawyers in every region of Quebec. The concept of domestic violence myth, stereotypes, and risk factors would be better understood by lawyers willing to take on these files. And any victim who wants to report a crime should be able to receive support before making their complaint. These are the pre-denunciation or pre-report meetings that we held in the pilot project. And we also need specialized training and tools offered to all lawyers in Quebec. And this would enable lawyers to feel that they were better able to manage such files. Here's an article by Rima El Khoury, published in February of this year, that talked about the end of phase 2 of Rebâtir and how important this program is for Quebec. We hope that one day this project will be reborn out of its ashes, but for now, we can't count on the program. So that's it. We'll let you read this document, and now we'd like to invite you to evaluate what you heard today. It's very important. The link is here, and which will enable you to evaluate the presentation that you heard today. Thank you for your attention, and now we'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much, Mesdames. Thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. I am blown away by what has been done over the past 4 years in terms of developing comprehensive services. Bravo for all the energy that's been put into establishing these services that are so important. We have a little bit of time left for questions. There was a question in the Q&A box, and it concerned keeping the victim in her home. And this person would like to know a bit more about the different steps that are taken in order to ensure that the person can remain in her own home. And what do you do to protect her safety? How do you proceed in files like this? Elise, go ahead.
Oui, j'allais dire, veux-tu y aller,
I was
Catherine?
going,
On peut se
yeah.
compléter ces
Yeah,
bonnes
Catherine and
pratiques
I
sur
can
ces
talk
notions-là.
both about
C'est
this
une
because we
question
work on
qui
this
répond
a
pas en
lot.
3 minutes, c'est
You
assez
can't
complexe.
answer this in 3 minutes.
On y
It's
travaille
very
assez
complicated.
depuis 4 ans.
We've been working very hard
Je
over
vous
the
dirais que
past 4
ça varie
years on
beaucoup
it.
aussi d'une
And
situation
I
à
would say it
l'autre.
depends
Une
greatly on
partie
the
de la réponse se
situation.
cache dans la
Part of the
diapositive, mais
answer
l'ensemble
is in the slide
recouvre
where you see the
plus
different kinds of
disponible dans les
remedies
différents
that are
domaines de droit.
available
Aujourd'hui, on a
in
pas parlé
various areas
d'ordonnance
of
de
law.
protection.
We don't talk about civil protection orders, but now in Quebec, we can ask for the eviction of the perpetrator in an emergency of situation, and then there are orders, restraining orders, restrictive use orders that are made at the same time as custody requests are made. There are all kinds of mechanisms available. It depends on the facts, the level of risk, the level of danger, and the needs and what the victim wants. We try to decide what is best, what's best to do to keep the victim in her home. Unfortunately, sometimes as lawyers, we say, no, we don't recommend this. You're at much too high risk, and the person has to go to a safe house. So I would say that the answer is complicated. And sometimes we call our partners directly to ensure that there's close follow-up for the victim if she's in a particularly dangerous situation. Now, I'd just like to add something. The idea of keeping the person in her home is to respect the victim's choice. What we've heard at Rebâtir is I called the police yesterday because my spouse was violent with me, and the police said I had to leave the house. So we understand why the police say that. The police officer probably recommended they leave because it wasn't safe, and the safest solution would be to leave the home. But when the victim hears or what they understand from what the police said is I've been forced to leave, and that she herself was penalized, that she did something wrong. But in fact, it's just that the police can't protect the person. There has to be so recommending that the person leave is fine, but the person has to the victim has to understand that she has a choice, and she has to decide freely according to the circumstances. I would even go further. There are victims who tell us, if I had known, I wouldn't have called the police. I don't, they don't, if they had known, they wouldn't have gone to the system because they thought the system was supposed to help them. And that's why we talk about keeping women at home, and we work on various options that will enable women to remain in the home safely. What I'm hearing throughout your presentation is that you really look at solutions that are tailored to the individual, and you take a holistic view. That's something else that I learned from your presentation. Thank you so much. It was extremely interesting. We're going to have to end this presentation now, but everything will be available on the website. And with all the webinars and all the research summaries, and that way we can reach an even broader audience by making your presentation available. So thank you so much. And it's too bad that we have to end now because there's so many questions, but perhaps we'll be able to do this again one day soon. So thank you to the three of you, and thanks to everyone who participated in today's webinar. Thank you so much. We'll see you again.